Go ahead, Joe.
Okay, well, I've got a little presentation. I want to talk a little bit about what the previous council does. And then what I'd like to do then is relate it to, Dave introduced me to Peel's principles of policing, the 9 principles, and kind of the new role we have to look at for police in this very complex civil society. So first, I'd like to just discuss our mandate. The council was one of the government's 2019 mandate to engage civil society and provide independent advice to government. This includes how government can support civil society's efforts, whether by reducing red tape, collaborating more effectively, or helping to build civil society's capacities to address social issues. The council has 15 members with diverse experience and perspectives and from diverse areas of the province. It's really, I see it as a council of wisdom, that we have a lot of people with different experiences that we combine to address these issues. And we do mainly consultations with the public. We've had 3 rounds of consultations over the 2.5 years we've been involved. So I wanted just a brief note on, we had a lot of discussions on what is civil society. And so our purposes, civil society includes established nonprofit organizations and charities, as well as informal groups and movements pursuing shared interests. It also includes individuals and organizations from the private sector that are pursuing social good. So I'll just touch on each of these briefly. The not-for-profit and voluntary sector impacts the life of every Albertan, from sports and recreation to arts and culture, health, education, environment, social issues, community development, faith groups, and professional associations, which also includes police. The not-for-profit sector and its volunteers provide a vast array of programs, and it's the backbone of vibrant, welcoming, and engaging communities. The informal grassroots groups or movements often play important roles by creating community and supporting fellow community members. These are efforts that are often unrecognized by those not directly involved or in emerging times of crisis. And we found this really was critical during the time of the pandemic, where organizations and people just got together and helped out. The private or business sectors are important partners in building strong, inclusive, and caring communities, so that our mandates include them in relation to their efforts at pursuing positive community impacts. Because we found that many in the private sector are pushing beyond just being good corporate citizens and are embracing efforts to make their organizations more open to diverse perspectives and acknowledging the value of supporting inclusive workplaces and communities. Many are also actively pursuing opportunities for positive impact through focused efforts on, as you know, the ESG, environmental, social, and government policies and practices. Civil society, then, in our definition, is the community of citizens and organizations linked by their mutual interests in contributing to public life and the common good. And some people even call this the glue. Civil society is the glue that holds communities together. The council has the challenging but rewarding role of trying to figure out how all of these actors in partnership with government can make a difference. So our mandate is based on the idea that the key to building communities that we want, that is safe, vibrant, inclusive, caring communities, is to ensure that civil society flourishes. In other words, civil society comes first. Now, we've done 3 rounds of consultations over the last 3 years or so. So our first report, Moving Forward, Charting a Path to Civil Society, in which we looked at the impact the pandemic has had on particularly the not-for-profit sector. And we made recommendations based on our consultations on how to improve that situation. And John, you could send them the link. I've got the link here if they need it, to that particular report. It's public. It resulted in the criteria for a civil society fund. And in the last 3 years, the government has funded 99 civil society projects across the province based on those criteria that we came from that consultation. And then our other report focused in on women and the impact that the pandemic particularly had on women. And what we found is, I'll give over a brief of these findings because it does relate, I think, to how policing could, some of the issues that policing have to deal with. We found that the pandemic increased the burden of childcare and domestic roles in relationship to school and childcare roles, lockdowns and isolation for women. Disproportionate impact on sectors predominantly staffed by women, such as caregiving, direct service delivery, education, hospitality, and retail. And they were also impacted from working at home. Loss of employment and employment opportunities and career paths were put on hold. Increased vulnerability to abuse and exploitation resulting from the pandemic and associated isolation measures. This happened in the cities, but particularly in the rural areas where women were found feeling quite isolated in terms of trying to get help. They had lots of access to supports and services, so increased barriers to increasing supports and services due to isolation. A digital divide. We found that found that the importance of the internet in the rural areas, it's quite sporadic, and it limited women in terms of their ability to communicate with other people and with public health measures. And we found women had heightened challenges related to mental health and addictions and other vulnerabilities such as housing instability and financial insecurity. So in general, we found that Albertans are facing increasingly complex and costly social and economic issues, such as homelessness, mental health, addictions, crime, lack of affordable housing with within government ministries. And then what we found is that the internal and external actors, not only government ministries and departments involved, but also citizens and users were involved, private sector, foundations, faith-based organizations, service clubs, profit and non-profit service providers, voluntary organizations, registers, employees, and employees. And police had to deal with all of this during the pandemic. So what we're looking for, like some of the lessons that we learned, is that issues are complex, and therefore we must work together to address the many facets and include the many influences underlying these issues. The power of civil society. Each community has its own issues, knowledge, leadership, interests, and dynamics, which can come together and address these local needs. And this is something I'd like to discuss with you in terms of the role of policing, because each community, as you know, and how it operates is quite different, even between rural areas and the cities. And we found the principle of subsidiarity was important because government cannot dictate from above. It must work with municipalities and local communities, and it must play a more collaborative role and develop mechanisms to listen, to work with, and continue to communicate openly. So empowerment, when empowered, we found communities and citizens can come up with their own solutions, in which government provides the resources to accomplish their goals. But it also means that with changing, we need to stay open to the changing roles of all the different institutions, including policing. One last point, intersectionality. When it comes to the social inequalities, people's lives and organizations of power in a given society are better understood as being shaped not only by a single axis of social division, be it race, gender, or class, but by many axes that work together and influence each other. So we're finding that we're in a much more complex society now, and that requiring different forces are at work and requiring change that have to occur within, not for profit, but also I'm going to focus in on police. So as I understand, one of the mottos I've come across many times for police is to serve and protect. So I'm interested in hearing from you if you agree with these two components, both service and protection. And I'd like to then discuss the vision, mission, and objectives of each component. So what does to serve mean? How is it operationalized in practice in civil society? How are the policing forces shoot. Let me just stop this here. How are the police forces supporting, training, and rewarding these officers for this function? And then in terms of protection, what does it mean in terms of service? How is it operationalized in practice? And how are police forces supporting, training, and rewarding the officers for this function? So those are my two areas for discussion that I'd like to answer any questions regarding civil society. But I'm really interested in the changing role of police now in this very complex society, in terms of service and in terms of protection. And I'll end here if anyone has questions.
I would invite in both questions and comments, because I know Devon Clunas, Wayne, and of course others are going to have a comment on the concept of service. And if I could just start, that I think the concept of service generally in North America, not just Canada, service to the community has shifted considerably. That we moved to this law enforcement model, which is I'm finding having a destructive sort of effect on policing as a role in society, that very often police services themselves have lost sight of their role, that is to respond to local neighborhood, community crime and disorder issues and work with the community to solve those problems. And again, this is superficial, but I think it's important that new police officers today are taught to be law enforcement officers. They're taught all of the command and control, the regulatory side, use of force and all of that, and very little about what their real role is, Joel. Their real role of prevention, which is why Peel's principles and Peel's exist. I mean, even legislation, laws themselves were never intended to be enforced arbitrarily. They were intended to prevent people from committing these offenses. So I think it's all shifted, and unfortunately, I think that's part of the reason why we exist. Now, when it comes to serve and protect, I think even the protection side has gone to this law enforcement model. That their vision of protection is simply arresting or charging people and feeding what I call the failing criminal justice system. So I think it's a real issue personally. Now others are going to have a different opinion. And again, there are police officers on the street, many police officers on the street, but I think I have an understanding of that. They have good, strong human relation skills, and they do want to help. But because of their significant workload, they got to get back in the car and tear around their call for service, and they don't get to apply the skills personal skills that they have to help actually solve the problem. And that's my comment, and I really invite anybody else to sort of answer Joel's question about to serve and protect.
Well, I would definitely like to weigh in on this, and I love your presentation. I love the principles that you're really articulating here. When empowered people can come up with their own solutions. Now, think about that in the context of policing. And I just want to say, sometimes people use the word force or department or service, but policing in our country has gone through this transition. Winnipeg for many years was a police force, and they went to police department. But all police services across Canada now have a brand of a service. It's a service. So they were actually trying to shift away from this force and this protection. But I do agree with Chief Castles that I think we've kind of lost sight, where really the only thing they have time to do right now is what we think we're protecting by responding to crime. And it's just, we got to fight against the bad elements out there. So it's more this mindset of protection. And as he said, I don't think because we're so focused on just being responsive that we're actually doing the best job protecting. Takes me back to what you said, that we have to work with the community to empower the community to be part of the solution. And because the last crop of police officers are just being driven by calls, from call to call to call, we have lost sight of that principle of how do we fully engage with communities so that we can work together to do a better job on the serving side, because they feel so much it's their job just to fight against crime. And we're not doing the best job protecting because we're not doing a very good job serving. So we have to make that link. I agree with those commentaries, 100%.
So if I could make a comment here, my grandson is in his first year of policing course at MacEwan University, His dad's been a police officer as well. So what he's learning, like the broken window syndrome and some of these theories rather, and he's learning a lot of very positive, he and I are communicating aspects of policing. How is that police education different from recruiting and orienting police officers when they're hired, and then also the implementation? And how are police officers rewarded, or how is the police service set up so that officers who are doing the service that you're talking about and looking at prevention and talking to people in the community, as opposed to the number of people they arrest or whatever, how they're rewarded, the number of tickets they give out or whatever. Like it seems that he's learning one aspect of policing from a very positive perspective, prevention and a positive things to look for and how to interact with civil society, versus what I see, as you say, in practice, let's say in the Calgary Police Force, as an example.
I would say the reward system within policing is flawed. I take it way back to when I was a recruit. You look at all the people who would typically get promoted. It will be the ones who are doing the things you see on television, the major crime, the homicide detectives, all of those pieces. I often challenge people and say, you've never seen a hit television show about a school resource officer. That's more the service component of what you're talking about. Or in our world, when people would say they want to do community policing, the guys in, like I said, the major crimes, the homicide, we look at them as being lazy. And so within the culture of policing, the type of policing that we're talking about wasn't really highly valued, wasn't really rewarded. But I can tell you this, though, that shift is taking place in culture. It really is. Absolutely, positively. And we have to realize sometimes change, it looks like it's not happening, but it is, and it's actually accelerating right now. So we just really need to stay the course. And in terms of bringing in national standards or even provincial standards that say, this is what we value, that's part of what we need to do. We need to really codify that, because as I said in the past, what we valued in policing was all of this hardcore policing. But I can tell you, when I took over as chief in Winnipeg and I talked about crime prevention through social development, one of the greatest compliments I ever received when I announced my retirement was having an officer in major crimes coming up to me and said, Devon, 80% of us are 100% behind what you're doing, because my philosophy was totally contrary to the current culture of policing. It was more of what we're talking about. So I do believe that shift has taken place. We just need to keep feeding it now.
Excellent.
Just to support that, Devon, I believe, and Dwayne could talk about it, Dwayne actually did a thesis, his study on what happened with Edmonton's community policing initiatives. But I truly believe that the leadership has to take a key role in this issue, that the culture is not going to change unless the leaders recognize those that are doing the local community neighborhood problem solving, that more emphasis is given and recognition is given to those that are trying to truly, sincerely solve local community disorder problems. And they vary from one extreme to the other. The problem has been, traditionally, the culture has been to reward those that think about the volume of tickets, the enforcement against whatever the situation is. Even some of the formation of gangs, like the street gang unit, is all around enforcement. It is not around the prevention of young people joining street gangs. They become surrogate families. So it's a whole shift in philosophy, and it must come from the leadership. Dwayne, very briefly, I mean, you can talk a little bit about the success or not lack of success with Edmonton's community policing initiatives, through your doctorate. And again, if you can keep it short, Dwayne, because you and I, this is an important issue, and we can talk about it all day, Joe. So, Dwayne.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the issue here, Dave. I could probably get very long-winded, so I hope I don't. But I want to take just a little different lead into this. And it stems from the time that I was president CEO of the Mustard Seed Society for Alberta. And I was down in Calgary. Of course, we looked at housing for the homeless. We dealt with the Foothills shelter, where we took in about 250 people a night. And some of the things that you've talked about, Joel, kind of touch on it. In a civil society, it's not good enough for an agency, for example, as the Mustard Seed, to strictly house people, feed them. What I saw, and it became very apparent, was you could house people that needed the homes, but if you didn't integrate them with the community or some community, it wouldn't be long before they were back on the street, or they'd be sleeping beside their bed in a place that would be classified as their own home. What the Seed did was try to integrate the people into the community. It was faith-based, and so they did a few things. One was, although it's a nonprofit organization, they also did what you could say a profit side of the house. They would actually help people to work. So they'd have community work for them, knowing that people that they were housing, a lot of them didn't have because of their mental illness or different issues that they were struggling with, could probably not work for more than 2 or 3 hours a day, or they would show up late. But the work that was supplied for them allowed for that. They weren't, if they could work 8 hours a day, that's great. They'd be paid for that, and that would help them in their work. So that was one aspect. The other aspect was trying to get them involved with community itself, trying to connect them with the churches so that they would be out to the ball afternoons where they, people play baseball and connect and different things. So they get connected to people and involved with a community. That was so important. And they had things, for example, like drama classes. And you can imagine street people doing drama. They had no skills, but the people that went through it and fought their urges to fight it, and when I say fight it, they would get mad at themselves and fly off the handle. But when they finally did a production, which was terrible, the smiles on their faces and the connection they made with the people was so important. So taking that and looking at policing is basically a different side or another aspect of community relations. And part of it, though, is that our communities have asked policing to look at use of force and to basically deal with crime issues. So there's part of it is, and police can't get around it. They deal with organized crime groups. They deal with human trafficking. They deal with the murders. For example, when I was in Trinidad, that was the big thing, murders. In fact, this year they're topping their biggest year for murders. They've got 575 already for this year, with a population of the size of Calgary, so which rivals all of Canada. So you have to have a suppression element to try to deal with that aspect. But the other half deals with community relations, and that's going out and building relations, finding out what the community needs, how you can prevent crime, how you can help match communities, the people with the programs and that are out in the community. I think that's where police have failed in the last few years, is we're so intent on getting out to the crime scene, investigating it, trying to find out the issues. We've kind of gone back to a reactive style policing rather than going out and engaging the community to find out what are the things that are causing their concerns within their communities. And once you've gotten down to the root issues and you're working with the communities, not to take over all their problems, because the police officer can't. They aren't counselors, they aren't psychologists, they only have so much ability, but they also have the ability to engage people with the right organizations
Right.
that can help out. And the organizations within the community can actually deal with their own crime issues and the prevention of crime. For example, we had the, I've lost the name of it, but it was basically an independent group would come in, organize communities, find the leaders within the communities to
Right.
deal with the problems and the issues, with police being a partner to help out where they could. So it wasn't police led, it was community led, and the police engaging where they had to help out. And if we can focus on that piece, I think you'll have more civil society, and one where the communities are building the strengths themselves, and it goes from there.
Yeah. So should the police be doing that, or could they be setting up an association with social work or something to work together along with community leaders? Or should that be a component, prevention, be it a component of the actual police force? It makes more sense to be one to me, but I'm curious.
I think it's both. One, on the suppression side, of course, police look at proactive policing, trying to get out in front of different things. So, when you talk intelligence-led policing or whatever, they try to use what they have, stats and everything else, to know where the crimes are going to be committed prior to them being committed, so they can actually get out in front of it.
Right.
But there's a second component, and that's working with the community leaders. Again, it's, for example, like you have, when I worked in the schools, for example, as a school constable, that was before they coined the terms community policing. But you would work with the administration of the school, you would work with the kids, you would
Right.
work with the parents of a large school and its feeder schools, along with the community leaders that were in the area. So you would engage everybody, and police had their role, but they weren't I wasn't the person to be doing the counseling of the kids, for example. I wasn't the person to be making the arrests in the school. I would actually call in other policemen to make arrests within the school if it needed it, because I was there to build the relations to help people understand why things were happening. And that component is quite often lost. For example, in Edmonton, when we talk school resource officers, the communities still see them as security guards of schools, and they aren't. They aren't there to make arrests. They're there to engage with the kids, get down on the mats when they're doing their wrestling, to be out there coaching with them, to be actually discussing life issues with them. That's what the kids need and what the kids want. And our communities, if you extrapolate from there, are similar. They want police officers out there speaking with them so that they understand what everybody's roles are and how we can best utilize the skills from all their different programs and purposes. And it shouldn't necessarily be driven by the police all the time. A lot of these kids programs, they love it when the police are involved, but if the police don't get involved, or if they step out of it, the programs fold.
Excellent.
But the police shouldn't be the ones running the programs.
Okay.
Dwayne and Joel, if I can, we've only got another couple of minutes, only because our treasurer has to leave our meeting at 3 o'clock, and we want the treasurer's report. So Joel, thank you, Dwayne. Joel, comments on what you've heard from our members?
Absolutely. I'm just trying to figure out how you as a organization can start influencing the local police services on this component. I think it's really important. I could give you other stories during my career, but involving people from a policing perspective. But I think this is the right direction that you're going. Okay, and anything we can do with the council, perhaps the council here should have a meeting with some police chiefs or whoever you think, just to hear more about the role they can play in civil society. That I'll bring that up maybe for the next years of consultation. That might be something.
Excellent.
Okay, so but thank you very much.
No, Joel, the thank you is all ours. We truly appreciate your attendance. Everything that you're talking about around guardianship and your writings and everything fits very well in this community policing model. So thank you so much for being with us today. We have one more question from Mubin, though. And Joel, please stay with us. Mubin, okay. You have a question.
Sorry about that. I'm going to keep it really short. I wrote my notes appropriately. I think what the coalition is really going to be helpful for Mr. Christie is, especially as Alberta moves forward with its ideas of an Alberta police service.
Yeah.
These are things that are going to become to the front and center really quickly. You talked about the 12 Pelian principles, and written in 1829, the fact that here we are in 2020, we're talking about it. I mean, you could post that up as a community notice piece, and everyone would be like, wow, this is so progressive and forward. I wanted to just very quickly say there's a whole issue of the transactional nature of policing interactions, the question of responsiveness, as of course Devin was mentioning. But I note very quickly, 2 points. One, even the service and protection you asked, to protect and to serve, that was the logo that was first devised by the LAPD in 1955. They then put them on their cars in 1963, and those police cars and those police shows on TV let people know that to protect and to serve, this is the motto of policing. It comes back to how policing is depicted on TV versus the real world. And just the quick last points on the school resource officers, and I'm definitely a supporter of that. Conversations with families about children at schools, talking about bringing communities, like working with local faith and civil society organizations for counseling, peer mentoring in low-level crime and even high-level crimes. And I submit that even speaks to Pelian principle number 4. The conversations with families about children and schools and the role of public and police are the public, that satisfies, I think, principles numbers 3, 5, and 7. And then finally, even defending the police space. I think there's a lot of talk of criticizing the police. There isn't enough about defending the police space, and I would incorporate that also in your considerations. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I was going to ask you what your comments were with the new police act, the police bill that Alberta just tabled, because I see the emphasis seems to be a little more on working with community, but be interesting discussion. They just tabled it last week, so.
Yes, yeah. I just want to conclude by saying this, Joel, that our principal focus is to create national training standards that are current and relevant. What police officers are learning today is very basic and traditional. I describe it as out of date, and it's not giving them all the skills to do the job. So if police officers today learn about their prevention side, the community policing side, how important these skills are, so that they understand that and they can apply that skill, which is prevention in a problem, regardless of what it is sometimes far better than just the enforcement side. So that's really what we're trying to do. Create national training standards in current and relevant subjects guided by a college of police. So we've got, first of all, again, Joel, thank you so much for being with us today. Please stay with us, okay?
Well, I'll stay in case you have more questions, because I know some people.
Meeting, we welcome your participation even throughout the meeting.